The Adventures of Sherlocks Comb and Dr. John H. Gnawson. Chapter 1. The Mundanity of Parsley and the Case of the Unsatisfying Felt. The borough at 221B Baker Street was, by all accounts, a masterpiece of contained chaos. For the residents of Rodentia, the city was a colossal, sooty labyrinth of towering stone and damp, neglected alleys. Borough 221B was the one place where that chaos was cataloged, indexed, and, with occasional luck, solved. The sitting room itself was constructed of expertly chewed fragments, tables fashioned from discarded clockwork gears, seats carved from velvet-lined matchboxes, and a hearth built from a thimble that held a single, stubbornly glowing ember. The walls were lined with the detritus of London's underbelly, tiny bottles of suspicious mud, different varieties of seed husk, and a comprehensive, meticulously labeled collection of suspicious crumbs. A magnifying glass, currently fashioned from a dewdrop held fast by a bent twig, glittered on the mantel. Sherlock's Comb, a sleek, red-furred squirrel of famously nervous disposition, was perched precariously on the back of his favorite matchbox chair. His tail, a magnificent, frantic plume of cinnamon fur, twitched with existential agitation. He was engaged in his morning ritual, stuffing a tiny clay pipe with a mixture of dried grasses and what appeared to be parsley. The faint, herbal smoke that curled lazily through the room was utterly, tragically non-psychoactive. "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data, Gnawson," Comb declared, puffing rapidly enough to make his cheeks twitch. "It biases the judgment, and my judgment is currently biased by the sheer, overwhelming mundanity of this parsley. My dealer, the Baker Street ferret, is a coward of the highest order. He claims the Queen's Constabulary has been cracking down on Schedule B weeds. B, Gnawson, it's an insult to my intellect." Dr. John H. Gnawson, a stout, melancholic beaver, sat by the makeshift hearth, his brow furrowed with a worry that was both professional and deeply personal. He was nervously chewing on a piece of thick, woven upholstery felt. Gnawson suffered from a profound, nearly paralyzing aversion to the texture, taste, and very concept of wood. The sight of a fresh-cut timber log sent shivers of revulsion down his spine. His very nature was a curse. He sighed, the sound like the rush of water through a small, forgotten dam. "I fail to see the connection, Comb," Gnawson muttered, carefully folding the felt over his powerful incisors. "Your habit and the lack of stimulating cases. The two are separate afflictions. My practice is slow, my nerves are frayed, and this felt," he paused to spit a tiny, unsatisfying fiber onto the hearth, "is utterly unsatisfying. If I have to gnaw on one more piece of upholstery, I shall go quite mad. I dream of stone, Comb, solid, unyielding stone." Comb's sharp black eyes, which seemed to be taking in the entire room at once, fixed on his partner. "Precisely! The data of our idleness. It screams of a city lulled into a false sense of security. A criminal mastermind is at work, Comb. Once subtle, his crimes are invisible. He is the great unsure, the one who leaves no splinters. The very scarcity of thrilling data is the data. It means a villain is perfectly organizing his crimes to leave no loose ends, no crumbs, no telltale gnaw marks." Just as Gnawson was about to object, to suggest that perhaps a lack of crime simply meant that people were being better citizens, A frantic scrabbling erupted at the entrance hole, immediately followed by the sound of a well-tailored piece of thistle silk ripping. A young, well-dressed mouse, who introduced himself breathlessly as Lord St. Simon's field mouse, tumbled into the burrow, his whiskers a-quiver and his tiny gold-button waistcoat undone. "Mr. Comb, Dr. Gnawson, you must help me. I implore you. It is a matter of the most delicate, most catastrophic nature." The mouse's voice was a high-pitched squeak of pure distress. My fiancée, the lovely Miss Hattie, the dove of Dulwich, she has vanished on the very day of our nuptials." Comb froze. The movement was instant. Absolute. The frantic plume of his tail snapped still. He took a long, deliberate drag of the parsley-filled pipe, and for the first time that morning, his eyes were no longer agitated. They were gleaming black pools of terrifying focus. "Calm yourself, Lord Field Mouse," Comb instructed, his voice now a low, razor-sharp purr. "Omit nothing. Begin with the seed selection at the breakfast buffet. Was there a preponderance of sunflower or a reliance on the common millet? Did the oats appear freshly dried? The devil, my dear field mouse, is in the dietary details." Gnasson's internal monologue flared with sudden familiar excitement. "Good heavens! An abduction! The first case in 3 weeks! This will make a marvelous chapter." "Quiet, my dear fellow." Comb flicked a small, curled piece of felt, one of Gnasson's discards, at his partner without looking. "You are narrating, not deducing. Continue, Lord Field Mouse. Was there a draught, a peculiar scent on the air, the faint, lingering aroma of cat?" Lord Field Mouse wrung his tiny paws, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "No cat, but she left a note, chewed from the corner of the wedding program. It says only, 'The nest is not what it seems. Look to the silent partner.'" Comb snatched the tiny mangled piece of paper. He held it to his nose, sniffing the faint odor of dye and damp. Then, to Gnasson's faint revulsion, he touched the paper to his tongue. "Aha! The plot thickens, or, more accurately, the pulp of the paper reveals itself," Comb announced, his eyes lighting up. "This was not chewed in distress. Observe, Gnawson, the incisor marks are too even, too deliberate. This was a message chewed with cold, calculated intent. And the pulp," he shivered with sudden, delightful insight, "it has the distinct, bitter aftertaste of banker's ledger." Gnawson stared at him aghast. "Ledger? How can you possibly know that?" "Elementary, my dear Gnawson," Comb said, tossing the paper back. "I spent last Tuesday sampling the stationery of every major financial institution in the city. A necessary, if tedious, cataloging of despair and avarice. I cataloged the paper, the ink, the unique chemical taste of every banking house. The flavor of their greed, Gnawson, is quite specific. Lord Field Mouse, who handles your family's considerable acorn reserves?" Lord Field Mouse swallowed hard. "Why, the firm of Moriarty and Company, the Napoleonic Rat of the banking world." The pipe fell from Comb's mouth, scattering harmless parsley on the floor. His entire body went still, save for the very tip of his tail, which twitched with the manic intensity of a hummingbird's wing. "Moriarty," Comb whispered the name, tasting it like the foul ledger pulp. "The spider at the center of the web. The one beast in London whose intellect might rival my own on a day when I have procured actual cannabis. This is not a mere disappearance. This is the first move in a grand game, and the board is all of London." He turned to Dr. Gnawson, his eyes blazing with a frightening mix of ecstasy and focus. "The game, Gnawson, is afoot, and we must follow the scent. Quickly, to the scene of the crime, and send word to the Baker Street ferret. Tell him the stakes have been raised. I require his finest product, or I shall be forced to deduce the location of his entire miserable stash." Before Gnawson could strap on his satchel or gather his spots, Comb was a blur of red fur and deductive reasoning, darting out the burrow's entrance. Gnawson scrambled after him, muttering miserably to himself about the dreadful state of the cobblestones. "A case! A glorious, terrifying case!" he thought, his anxieties momentarily overcome by the delicious prospect of a new, long, and thrilling chapter. And I am the one who will write it. Chapter 2: The Rat in the Labyrinth and the Geometry of Greed. The journey from Burrow 221B to the financial heart of Rodentia's London was less a commute and more a descent into an architectural canyon. For the small creatures traversing it, the narrow streets of the 14th century were terrifying. Towering walls of soot-stained brick and cold, damp stone. Drainage pipes, slick with moss and unknown filth, served as the city's major arterial highways, and Sherlock's Comb moved along them with the speed of a projectile, his keen senses absorbing every micro-detail of the world rushing past. Dr. Gnawson struggled to keep pace. His stout beaver frame was not built for such agility, and the pervasive dampness made his fur heavy. He spent the entire journey internally lamenting his state, occasionally gnawing miserably on the piece of felt he had tucked into his cheek. "I fail to see the immediate necessity of this pace, Comb," he puffed, clinging to the rusty rim of a massive downspout that smelled powerfully of iron and old rain. "A slower pace allows for more comprehensive observation, and I am absolutely soaking. My medical bag is ruined." Comb, perched silently on a piece of protruding masonry, did not even turn around. His gaze was fixed on their destination, the formidable bank of Moriarty and Co. "Observation is meaningless without context, Gnawson," Comb murmured, his voice now entirely devoid of its earlier manic energy, replaced with a cold, analytical stillness. "And the context is clear. A calculated, high-stakes move by the Napoleon of crime. He has taken a dove, the symbol of peace and pastoral innocence, to leverage control over the city's last untamed green space. It is a crime of economic philosophy, Gnawson, not mere theft." The bank was a terrifying sight. It was constructed not of wood, but cold, unforgiving stone, its foundation blocks etched with patterns so intricate they looked menacing. This was the rodent architecture of greed, precise, permanent, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I fail to see the connection, Comb," he whispered, chewing harder on his felt. "My life is so dull. I am merely the backdrop to genius. I am the dull, wooden frame around the brilliant red-furred painting. A missing dove, a chewed note, and now we are shivering in the damp, staring at a hole in a wall. It is a literal rat hole." "Not a hole, Gnawson. The hole," Comb corrected, his eyes pinpricks of focused light. He had not blinked in 3 minutes. "Observe the gnaw marks around the perimeter. They are not the ragged, desperate chewing of a common sewer rat attempting to survive the winter. They are precise, mathematical. Look at the angle of the chisel marks. They are calculated to minimize structural stress while maximizing ingress width. This is the signature of a mind that calculates interest compounded hourly. This is the front door of Professor Moriarty." Gnawson peered at the hole, smelling only damp earth and, faintly, the metallic cold odor of avarice. He couldn't see the mathematics. He only saw a hole. "A professor?" Gnawson asked. "Of what? Structural engineering?" of villainy, my dear fellow. He is the organizer of every unfiled claw mark, the source of every misplaced acorn in this city. He doesn't merely steal Gnawson, he reallocates assets. And he has taken Lord Fieldmouse's dove not for her, but for what she represents, an alliance. The Fieldmouse family controls the last unclaimed patch of sun-drenched south-facing parkland, the perfect location for a high-rise nesting silo with exorbitant rent. Comb leaned forward, his voice a dry professorial rasp. Moriarty isn't just a criminal. He's a property developer, the most dangerous kind of beast in the 14th century. Just then, the entrance hole darkened. A hulking, silent water vole, one of Moriarty's notorious enforcers, known for his brute strength and absolute lack of conversation, emerged. He dropped a small folded piece of damp vellum onto the ground and vanished back into the gloom without a sound. Comb darted down, snatched the paper, and was back on the pipe in a flash of red fur. "Aha!" Comb cried, unfolding the note. It contained no words, only a single, complex mathematical formula written in stark, precise rat scratchings. It looked like a geometry problem crossed with an investment prospectus. "A cipher!" Comb exclaimed, delighted. "But to a mind like mine, it is as clear as the Baker Street ferret's conscience. It is a meeting place. The coordinates, the Royal Botanical Gardens, the Palm House." Gnawson's composure, already thin, snapped. "The Palm House? But that's a jungle, Comb. There are geckos there. And the humidity. My felt will be utterly limp." "Precisely," Comb said, refolding the note and tucking it securely into his cheek pouch. "Neutral territory. Humid. Unpleasant for ledgers. Moriarty's one weakness, a disdain for uncontrolled ecosystems. He prefers his chaos on a balance sheet. He will have taken the dove there, calculating we would never risk the environment." Comb suddenly smiled, a thin, unnerving sight that promised imminent cerebral violence. He reached into his coat, a garment made from a discarded glove finger, and produced a small, fresh sprig of dried actual cannabis, pilfered at last from the ferret's secret stash during their frantic departure. "The finale approaches, Gnawson, and he held the precious herb up, inspecting it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. "I have a plan, the final piece of data." He replaced the parsley with the aromatic green sprig. "For this confrontation, I require my mind to be at its most lateral. To outthink a rat whose world is two-dimensional, based on figures and profit margins, one must first achieve a higher state of rodent consciousness." Comb took a long, deep, and this time incredibly effective drag from his pipe. The subtle twitching of his tail stopped. His limbs slackened and his breathing became shallow and slow. When he opened his eyes, the terror of Moriarty, the anguish of the field mouse, and the misery of Dr. Gnawson seemed to fade into a cosmic insignificance. His pupils, black and deep, were pools of infinite, calm, and terrifying perception. "The world is made of connections, Gnawson," he said, his voice a slow, syrupy drawl, yet piercingly clear. "I can see them all. The geometry of the cobblestones, the flight path of the gnats, and the profound sadness of your felt. It is all one. And Moriarty is a flaw in the pattern." Let us go and correct him." He leaped from the pipe, a serene, floating glide, leaving a stunned Dr. Gnawson to scramble desperately after him, already damp, miserable, and profoundly jealous. "Good heavens!" Gnawson gasped, stuffing the damp felt back into his mouth. "I've created a philosopher king, and I'm going to have to write it all down." Chapter 3. The Palm House Revelation and the Unraveling of a Friendship. The Royal Botanical Gardens Palm House was a humid, overwhelming cathedral of glass and greenery, a tropical jungle imprisoned beneath a soaring iron and glass dome. For the creatures of Rodentia, it was a bewildering, alien landscape. Leaves as broad as blankets dripped with perpetual moisture. Orchids unfurled in riotous exotic displays, and the air thrummed with the unseen life of insects, all of it thick with the scent of damp earth and verdant decay. High in the ironwork gantries, where steam pipes crisscrossed like metallic vines, a sinister lair had been constructed. It was a network of stolen bird nests, repurposed ventilation ducts, and discarded fragments of glass, forming a precarious, elevated fortress. Perched behind a desk made from a stolen silver snuff box, cool and unbothered by the oppressive humidity, sat Professor Moriarty. He was a gaunt, graying albino rat, his spectacles fashioned from polished fish scales glinting in the dappled light. The kidnapped dove, Miss Hattie, unharmed but clearly distressed, fluttered nervously in a gilded cage beside him. Moriarty's voice, when he spoke, was a dry rustle, like pages turning in a long-forgotten ledger. The great Sherlocks Comb. I calculated you would decipher the formula, a trivial exercise for a mind of your particular acuity. I did not, however, calculate you would arrive smelling of a dockside apothecary, or perhaps a particularly potent garden bed. Sherlock's comb drifted into the center of the clearing below. He moved with a preternatural calm, an almost Etherean grace. The frantic twitching that usually accompanied his brilliant mind was entirely absent. He looked not merely relaxed, but enlightened, as if he had transcended the very notion of gravity. Dr. Gnawson, however, huffed and puffed behind him, utterly bewildered by the humidity, his fur now completely plastered to his body. "Your calculations, Professor," Comb began, his voice a slow, syrupy drawl, yet piercingly clear, "are based on a limited data set. You understand greed. You understand fear. You grasp the mathematical certainty of profit. But you do not understand the interconnectedness of the mycelial network beneath the forest floor, the symbiotic relationships, the flow of cosmic energy. It's all one, you see, a single breathing entity. Your ledgers, Professor, are but a single flat sheet in a vast spherical universe." Moriarty blinked slowly behind his spectacles, a flicker of something akin to confusion crossing his usually impassive face. "I see you have fortified yourself for our encounter, a pathetic attempt to enlighten a mind that is at its core merely a nut-gathering instinct writ large. Your philosophical meanderings are irrelevant to the matter of property deeds." Comb gently plucked a dewdrop from a broad, waxy leaf and examined it, turning it over in his paw, the tiny sphere reflecting the entire jungle and within its surface. "Nut-gathering is a form of cosmic redistribution, as is your plan for the parkland, Professor, a grand scheme to reallocate natural beauty into rented space. But you made one error. Not in your math, not in your logistics. in your aesthetics. Dr. Gnawson, thoroughly exasperated and more concerned with the limp state of his felt, finally burst out, "For heaven's sake, Comb, the dove! He's a property developer! Let's get to the point." Comb did not look at Gnawson. His serene galactic gaze remained fixed on Moriarty. "The note, Professor. The nest is not what it seems. Look to the silent partner. You had Miss Hattie chew it. A clever misdirection. But doves are granivores. Their bite is a soft crushing motion designed for seeds. Delicate. The note I examined back at 221B had the sharp, chiseling incisor marks of a beaver." Dr. Gnawson froze. The damp, half-chewed felt fell from his mouth, his jaw dropped, and a sickening dread began to unfurl in his gut. Moriarty, for the first time, faltered. His dry, rustling voice hitched. A beaver?" "Yes." Comb's voice was soft, but it resonated through the steamy air like a bell. "A beaver who dislikes wood. A beaver so tormented by his own nature, so desperate for a purpose that did not involve timber, that he sought excitement elsewhere, in narrating the adventures of a detective, and in forging a secret partnership with you." Comb slowly turned his gaze, his eyes no longer burning with manic energy, but with a terrifying, absolute clarity, fixed upon Dr. John H. Gnawson. "It was you, my dear Gnawson, who suggested we take the case. You who kept insisting we were idle. You who provided the clue that led us here, arranging for the water vole to deliver the cipher at precisely the moment I was questioning the details. You are the silent partner. You arranged the dove's disappearance to create a crisis that would force Lord Fieldmouse to sell his land to you and Moriarty. A classic development syndicate. You wanted the thrill of the case and the profit from the land. A legacy of felt and stone, indeed." A stunned, horrified silence fell upon the palm house, broken only by the drip of water from broad leaves and Gnawson's shuddering gasp. The air seemed to grow heavier. I couldn't bear the wood," Gnawson stammered, his fur bristling with shame and panic. I wanted a legacy of felt and stone, not just to gnaw on things. I wanted to build something." Moriarty slammed a tiny, pale paw on the snuff-box desk, his composure returning with a hiss of rage. "A brilliant deduction, and utterly useless. You are outnumbered. You have no proof. My enforcers will see to you both." From the steamy foliage around them, Moriarty's brute squad emerged. The hulking water vole and two brutish, muscled stoats, their snouts twitching with predatory intent. They surrounded Comb, forming a menacing circle. Comb, however, remained utterly serene. He offered Moriarty a blissful, unnerving smile. "Proof is a human constraint, Professor. I operate on a higher vibrational plane. I also sent telegram." As if on cue, the glass ceiling of the palm house darkened. A flurry of wings, a cacophony of chirps and squawks filled the air. Perched on every iron strut, every beam, every convenient projection, were hundreds of birds, sparrows, starlings, finches, even a particularly fierce-looking wren, led by a very indignant Lord Fieldmouse. This was the avian constabulary. "Professor Moriarty, Dr. Gnawson, in the name of the Queen's Parkland Preservation Act, you are surrounded. Release my Hattie at once." A chaotic scene erupted. The air filled with diving, pecking, and squawking. Birds dive-bombed the lumbering stoats, blinding them with furious pecks to their eyes. The water vole, caught off guard, was swarmed by a flock of furious finches, pecked and prodded into submission. Moriarty, with a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage, attempted to flee along a winding steam pipe, only to be cornered by a very angry hummingbird, whose rapid-fire pecks to his nose were surprisingly effective. Comb observed the chaos with the detached amusement of a philosopher watching a particularly robust debate. He then turned to the gilded cage where Miss Hattie huddled. With a delicate, precise nip of his surprisingly strong squirrel teeth, he severed the lock, freeing the dove. "The game, Miss Hattie, is concluded," Comb said, his voice gentle. "You are free to return to your nest, which is, I assure you, exactly what it seems." As the humiliated villains, Moriarty spitting curses, Gnawson utterly broken and weeping, were led away by a flock of stern-faced constabulary robins, Comb took one last contemplative puff from his pipe. The cannabis had worn off, leaving him with a clear, sharp, but now profoundly melancholy clarity. "The greatest villainy, Gnawson, is not the love of money, but the betrayal of a friendship. For that, there is no easy deduction, only the long, lonely gnawing of regret." He didn't watch as his former friend, his narrator, his Boswell, was led away, head bowed in shame. He simply looked up through the glass at the gathering twilight and the emerging stars, his mind already drifting to the next mystery, the next connection in the great, breathing, endlessly complex entity that was London. The scent of damp earth and exotic blooms filled the air, mingling with the faint, lingering smell of disappointment.